One day, there was a young female person who was probably around the age of 12, 13, 14, something like that. And she lived with her parents and with her 5 siblings and her 2 dogs and her 3 cats and her 2 bunnies and her 1 guinea pig and her 4 goldfish. And she went into her backyard because there was a lot of noise in her house and she was tired and she needed a moment of quiet. So she thought if she went into her backyard, maybe she'd get a little moment of quiet. So she packed with her a pencil and a notebook, because when you have some quiet, it's always good to have a journal, because you never know what brilliant ideas you're going to get and need to write down so that you don't forget them. And especially when you are a person in need of quiet, it can be so hard to keep all the thoughts that are bobbing and whipping around your head, to keep them straight or to get a sense of who you really are. So sometimes you need to write down a whole lot just to hear yourself again. So she put her journal and her pencil into her back pocket and she went to her backyard. Now she had a humble sized backyard. They lived in a city, not in like a downtown area, so they have a little outdoor space, but it wasn't huge. There was a fence around it and it was nice. There were a couple trees and some grass and like a little patch of dirt. And she decided to sit down by the little patch of dirt, still in the grass because that's cozier, but by the little patch of dirt. And before she sat down, she took out the journal and the pencil because it's not that comfortable to sit on that. She didn't want the pencil to stick her in the butt, let's be honest. And so she avoided that. So she's sitting down on the grass next to this little patch of dirt, and there's a little twig that fell down from the tree whose branches are, reaching above her. And she holds the twig in one hand and the pencil in the other hand. And she just looks at them for a minute. Thinks it's pretty amazing that a pencil usually is made out of wood, just like this little twig. And I bet I could probably make pencils of my own one day if I, got the right kind of drill and the right drill bit and did it softly enough and had the right lead and all of that. That's a great idea. Maybe I should try making my own pencils. And so she opened up her journal and write down, make your own pencils in there, because that was a good idea. And she wanted to return to it and not forget. But she still needed some more quiet and spaced out time. So she, put her hands behind her palms on the ground and leaned back just to relax a little bit and really sink into the ground. And she looked at the little patch of dirt next to her and she took her twig and started playing in the dirt, making little swirls or designs, spirals, maybe her initials. And she started digging and she heard the sound of a little droplet of water. And this was confusing. She heard droplets of water coming from below. So she started digging a little more. And she heard what sounded like a rushing river. And she started digging a little bit more and she heard the boom of an ocean, the wind on an ocean. And she just couldn't believe what was happening. She couldn't have dug more than 2 inches. And these were the sounds she was hearing. And she said, I kind of need to know what's down there. And so she took her index finger that was holding the twig before, but now it really needed to get involved. And she put her index finger down in the hole. And it felt at first like moist dirt, and then it felt like her finger was taking a bath, and then it felt like her whole hand was starting to slide in, and her arm and her shoulder, and with her other hand she grabbed onto the notebook and the pencil, and it didn't make sense because of course paper will get wet in water, soggy, and nothing. But she took it, she just needed to grab onto something, and the blades of grass would just slip right through her fingers. So up to her shoulder is in, and now her head's going, and her legs, and her torso obviously followed before her legs, and her little toes were sticking up in the air, but there she was now, all inside this earth, all inside this this wellspring of water, right below her house. Or was it below? Was it below her house? No, because then she remembered, she remembered her parents had taught her how to swim in a pond one summer. And she remembered she did the breaststroke, she did the crawl, she did the backstroke, anything she could do. And she realized there was a surface, and she was floating up to it. And it wasn't her backyard. She was in the middle of a lake, gorgeous lake. She looked up, and above her she could see these blue mountains. It was blue because the sun was setting and the light had left them. And the tops of the green trees were starting to have the darkness set in from twilight. But she could still see the sun on one side in between two mountains. It was beaming through, and it was reflecting on the water all around her. And here, everything was orange, and it was like the sun lit it all up. It was like the water was on fire. But it wasn't fire, it was peace. She pulled out her notebook and her pencil, expecting just a soggy old mess. Somehow this paper was perfect. Water repelled off of it. It was completely fine. And somehow the surface of the water became like a tabletop. She was able to rest it open. She was treading water in that lake, and she had her pencil in hand and her journal open, and she was just writing everything that she saw. Everything about the blue mountains and the orange sky and the water and the fire and the peace. And all around her was quiet. She never felt more alive. After she wrote 6 pages, usually she would try to write 3, but there are some days where there's so much inside of you, you have to write 6. And no, you cannot fill up a whole notebook. That's too much, and a person will get too overwhelmed, and then they'll never come back to the page, so you can't do that. But she wrote 6 pages. That's 3 sheets of paper, front and back. She took a breath, and she looked up, and she saw that the sun was almost gone, and now there were stars everywhere. It was almost like the sky was brighter at night than during the day, the amount of stars that were up there. It was magnificent. She floated on her back. You know how when you float on a lake, and sometimes you're tempted to do the backstroke, but you don't even really try. You just do like the softest lap of your arms, just to feel a little bit of movement underneath you. And she sat there with her hands behind her head, looking up at the sky, counting the stars and seeing if she could see constellations. She floated to the shore. She sat there with her notebook and her pencil on the sandy beach, a lake kind of beach, so it feels somewhere between sand and dirt, and then there's you know, the grass right there and the reeds. She sat there, she took a breath, and she saw that there was a twig next to her. She held the twig in one hand and the pencil in the other hand. And she said, I've been here before. It turns out your pencil is your instrument, and the tree helps you write. But the tree helps you write also because it tells you everything you need to say. She looked around one last time at those mountains and the trees and the stars, the lake and the shore, the grass and the reeds. And she said, okay, I know it's time to go home. I've had my quiet, and I know how to get here, and I think I know how to go home. If I need to come back here, I will. But tonight I'll go to bed, and it'll be quiet in my house too. So she took the twig, and she started digging.